Welcome to Dick Morris Democracy. I'm Dick Morris. The murder rate in American cities has climbed to astronomical heights. Murders are up nationally 16% this year. In New York City, shootings tripled. Big problem. But the weird thing is about this is that we know what the solution is. We already faced the exact same problem in the 90s and the 2000s. And we solved it back then by implementing a policy of stop, question, and frisk in high-crime neighborhoods at high-crime hours of the night. It worked. We found thousands of unlicensed guns and saved countless lives. In 1993, there were 1,946 murders in New York City. Then the rate tumbled to 1,500, to 1,200, to 1,000, to 700, and in 2018 it hit a new low of 289 for the whole year. Then it began to soar, going up to almost 500 in 2020. A big part of the reversal was that the federal courts forced New York City to end stop, question, and frisk. They said 87% of the stops were Black or Hispanic New Yorkers, even though they were only 54% of the population. But 90% of the perpetrators and victims of violent crime, and 96% of the victims and their killers were also Black and Hispanic. Experience in other large cities was similar. So the police cut way back on these stops and the murder rate soared. Former New York City Police Commissioner Ray Kelly, my guest today, estimated that stop, question, and frisk saved 7,300 lives over the 11 years it was widely used, over 7,000 of whom were minorities. And beyond the weapons we found were the guy that left it at home, afraid of being busted on the street. The deterrent effect was huge. Black Lives Matter has a very valid point. Black lives do matter. They matter when black kids are playing in the street and are shot in crossfire. They matter when babies in carriages die from stray bullets flying around. They matter when a person pulls a trigger and kills a black man or woman or child or baby. Gun control advocates are zealous in wanting to take away guns that people use to hunt deer or ducks, but not when they're used to kill people. We literally have the ability to save thousands of lives a year if we would only stop people in high-crime areas at high-crime hours and search them for weapons. But stop and frisk would be meaningless without mandatory jail sentences if the cops find a loaded, unlicensed weapon. But woke liberals oppose mandatory sentencing. We know that judges are all too inclined to offer plea bargains if the system lets them, to reduce their crowded dockets. Yet without the certainty of 3 years in jail if a weapon is found, the program would have no deterrent effect. Those who carry illegal weapons would doubtless believe that they can beat the system and avoid jail. So we need to restore mandatory 3 years in prison for carrying a loaded, unlicensed gun in a big city. New York City Mayor-elect Eric Adams has called for a resumption of stop, question, and frisk when it is done in compliance with court decisions. He said the policy was abused in the past. He says frisking and patting a person down to see if it has a weapon is very different from an intrusive and unconstitutional search. He said we weren't even frisking. We were searching people, throwing people up against the wall. We were going through their pockets. We were telling them to empty their pockets. And he said that is illegal. But these days, stop, question, and frisk doesn't need to be intrusive unless frisking reveals a possible weapon, any more than we abuse people by searches when they pass through TSA screening at airports or when they enter Yankee Stadium. Indeed, the NYPD already uses mobile X-ray technology, the same as TSA uses, but only to detect bombs or threats against visiting VIPs. It is specifically prohibited for use in ordinary preventative stops on the sidewalk. We are denying our citizens the same protection we give visiting dignitaries. So let's really save lives, black, white, Hispanic, or Asian, by bringing back stop, question, and frisk. Nothing contributes as much to the conflict between minority citizens and police as the killing of unarmed civilians by police officers. Traffic stops are a big part of the problem. 1/4 of all killings of unarmed minority men happen during traffic stops. In the past 5 years, 400 unarmed men were killed when a cop pulled them over. The New York Times closely examined the evidence in many of these fatal encounters. Many were triggered by what criminologists call officer-created jeopardy, when cops place themselves in danger by standing in front of fleeing vehicles or reaching inside car windows. The paper said that officers sometimes responded with, quote, outside aggression to disrespect or disobedience. When a driver talks back or revs an engine or refuses to get out of the car, they get angry. They call it contempt of cop. Sometimes officers surrounded a car parked for a while with people inside, worried that there might be a crime in progress or in the offing. Then it turned out the passengers were just sleeping in their car. Startled awake, some reached for their phone, only to be shot as the officer thought he was reaching for a weapon. The Times said that more than 3/4 of the shootings examined happened as the driver was attempting to flee. It works the other way around. 60 officers have been killed since 2016, mostly by gunfire at the hands of motorists they had pulled over. The General Counsel of the National Fraternal Order of Police said, I've watched enough videos of an officer who is not on edge enough, and his dashcam camera films his own death. So when you're driving at 60 miles an hour and you see flashing lights in your rearview mirror and you hear a siren, a bolt of fear and trepidation shoots through your body. What did I do wrong? Why are the cops pulling me over? But if you're black, other questions course through your mind. Will I be busted? Will I be shot? Will I live to see my family? And the police officer has to ask himself the same questions. But why do we put our police and our citizens through this mental anguish? Why do we continue to risk the lives of police and of civilian motorists by pulling people over on the side of the road over traffic violations? Part of the reason is so cities and other municipalities can make money. The New York Times reports that 730 municipalities depend on traffic tickets for more than 10% of their revenues. Okay, but why can't we do what they do in London? Every car is photographed several times each day by hundreds of cameras mounted on lampposts as their cars thread their way through the city and down its thoroughfares. Then computers analyze the photos to spot cars without valid license plates, unregistered vehicles, cars whose regular driver is unlicensed. But the cameras and computers can also tell us if the driver has outstanding warrants for arrest or is wanted for other crimes having nothing to do with traffic violations. In London, they mail summonses to the offending drivers, and if they don't respond to the initial mailing and the reminders, a cop visits them at home, not on the side of the road with cars whizzing by at high speeds, not a panic-inducing situation which might trigger violence, at home. Why don't we do that in U.S. cities? Why don't we protect police and citizens from the peril of roadside traffic stops and at the same time cut the number of police-civilian confrontations that so fuel racial animosity in our society?
You just watched Newsmax TV, America's fastest-growing cable news channel, now in more than 70 million homes. You can get Newsmax TV on your cable system or check your cable guide. And if your system doesn't carry Newsmax, call them, tell them you want Newsmax TV, because we're real news for real people.